Well, thank you for inviting me this morning. It's a pleasure. A lot of familiar faces out there, and it's always great to get off of campus. It is hard to leave Blount County and come right to Roane County. No, I've known folks here for a long time, and I think I know this community pretty well, and a lot of similarities between Roane County and Blount County. The short sermon is things are getting better. Leslie, the recession ended in the summer of 2009. I've been saying for the last couple of years that's the good news. Then, of course, I throw cold water on the good news. The bad news about the end of the recession is it has just been a very slow, painful slog as we've tried to move the economy back to where it was before the recession started. So the economy has been growing in fits and starts since the summer of 2009, but by many measures of economic activity, we have not yet returned to where we were before the recession started. The unemployment rate remains elevated. The level of employment in our state economy and our regional economy here in Roane County has not fully been restored to where it was before the recession started. Some other broad measures of economic activity, state gross domestic product, state personal income, two very broad measures of economic activity, they have been fully restored to where they were before the recession started. I think we're on the cusp of, I've said this the last 2 years, I think we're on the cusp of fairly strong economic growth for the nation as a whole and for the Tennessee economy, and that will help lift Roane County, Blount County, East Tennessee, and the entire state. Now, I paused just a moment ago. The last couple of years, there have been a series of one-time events that have derailed what we hoped to be a very strong year of economic growth. This year is no exception. We began this year with a lot of uncertainty about fiscal policy, concerns over sequestration, concerns over the federal debt ceiling, concerns over the federal government deficit. There were growing pains throughout the global economy, notably in the European Union. Unfortunately, most of those issues turned against us early in this year. The good news is that we have been able to see ongoing economic expansion. We've actually had fairly strong job growth over the course of the last several months. And we're on a run statewide and nationwide in terms of recovering many of the jobs that have been lost over the course of the last many years. Manufacturing is going through a modest resurgence. I heard the words again on Bloomberg this morning coming in referring to a manufacturing renaissance. Now that's the good news. Here's some cold water for you. Don't expect a full return of manufacturing activity to where it was before the Great Recession started or back to the golden days, if you think of them as golden days in the 1990s, the 1980s, when we had a very, very strong and by and large a growing manufacturing sector. The growth that we're seeing in manufacturing is likely to be short-lived. We expect growth in manufacturing for at least the next couple of years. National outlook suggests manufacturing jobs will grow through 2019 before returning to a longer-term trend. So as is always the case, the economic outlook has some good news and there's some bad news. But I do think the best news for all of us this morning is that the economy is going through a meaningful rebound. We are recovering the losses that took place over the course of the Great Recession. Now, Leslie has asked that I spend the rest of the morning, I can't even say it, the rest of the morning, no, I'm going to talk for about the next 10 minutes and go through some of the slides here to give you a visual sense of what has been going on. So, inflation-adjusted gross domestic product for the national economy, our broadest measure of economic activity. You can see the dotted line there to the right of the vertical bar. And that dotted line, so you've got the real history of GDP, then the projections, which are subject to revision. But you can see that slowdown, that dotted line actually drifting down a little bit as we move through the latter part of 2012 and the early part of 2013. That bit of a slowdown is due to sequestration. Very importantly, it's due to the elimination of the payroll tax holiday that was implemented at the onset of the Great Recession to keep people spending to propel the consumer side of the demand side of our economy. That 2 percentage point reduction in payroll taxes that we all enjoyed So if you made $50,000 a year last year, you were enjoying a payroll tax cut of $1,000. A lot of people never even knew they were getting that payroll tax cut. They were spending it. That's gone. That's a real effect on the economy, and that's one of the real factors that has helped to slow economic growth early in 2013. Now, as we move through the year and consumers better understand the consequences of that payroll tax cut, and now the reversion back to pre-recession levels, we will see growth rates in the economy begin to improve as we move through the year. And as you can see, 2014, the growth rates, the dotted line again, the growth rates will be as high as anything we have seen going back to well before the start of the Great Recession. Non-residential investment in equipment, software, business structures. You can see the worst of the Great Recession affecting business investment across the board. Business investment in equipment, computer hardware and software, fits and starts. You can see the bars there, but generally performing very, very well, helping to enhance the competitiveness and the productivity of American business enterprises. The structure situation, after seeing some strength in 2011, largely growing from these dramatic setbacks in economic activity. Structures investment has not returned yet to where it was before the Great Recession started. And you can see the outlook. We have to get out into 2014 before we begin to see fairly stable, fairly consistent, not quite robust, but healthy growth rates in structures and sustained investments in equipment and software. That will be very good news as that continues, particularly the structure side of investment, because there's a lot of sales tax revenue associated with the building of industrial and commercial facilities. Interest rates at historical lows. You can see the flat line of the federal funds rate that the Federal Reserve maintains, hovering between 0 and 0.25%. Interest rates are very, very low today. There have been concerns going back to 2008 of spiraling inflation. There has been no spiraling inflation. The market conditions would not support rapid growth in inflation today. There's not significant cost push inflation coming from the labor market. Producers do not have the capacity to raise prices. There is a lot of money out there in the economy sitting at the Federal Reserve. That money is not being loaned out to businesses or households in such a way that would cause inflation to spike. In fact, if you read between the lines of the Federal Reserve's meetings and probe more deeply into some of the financial news, you'll find that there remain concerns about deflation in the economy as opposed to rising inflation. The outlook for 2014 through this year in 2014 into 2015 before we see any significant increase in interest rates from the Federal Reserve. So there's the inflation outlook right there. And you can see very volatile performance of producer prices. That's petroleum products, it's other raw materials, roller coaster over the ups and downs of the recession. But you can see going forward, all three of these measures of inflation at the consumer level, at the producer level, at the core level of inflation, all is expected to remain modest and reasonably within the Fed's comfort zone of 2 to 3% for the next couple of years. Manufacturing output in Tennessee, you can see the level of output there in the solid line as a share of what we produce in our state economy. Manufacturing, very, very important to Tennessee, much more important to Tennessee, to Roane County, to Blount County, to the suburban ring around the core of our metro area, and rural counties remain very, very dependent on manufacturing activity. For the nation as a whole, only 1 in 10 jobs, it's actually fewer than 1 in 10 jobs are today in manufacturing. I don't know the number for Roane County off the top of my head. In Blount County, it's about 1 in 4. So very disproportionately oriented towards manufacturing. And as a result, we ride that manufacturing roller coaster over the course of the ups and downs of the business cycle. But keep in mind the long-term trend for manufacturing employment, the level of employment, and employment as a share of our economy is moving in the downward direction. And you can see the employment share here, the dotted line. That dotted line is employment in manufacturing in Tennessee as a share of all jobs in Tennessee, continuing to trend down. So we need to continue to promote industrial development and industrial recruitment, but understand that the challenges are becoming more and more serious, more problematic as we go forward, as communities across the state and across the country chase a smaller and smaller number of firms, and in many cases, smaller firms themselves that bring lower levels of capital investment and lower levels of employment. Manufacturing employment as a share of total private employment, as I was suggesting a moment ago, many counties in Tennessee relying more heavily on manufacturing than the nation as a whole. These numbers are for 2011. You can see 11%, almost 11% of the nation's jobs in manufacturing. It is now below 1 in 10. But the number of counties, particularly as I noted, those counties around the metropolitan areas, so the Knox counties of Tennessee, the Hamilton County, Davidson County, Shelby County, much more diverse, much more reliant on government employment, education employment, health care employment, and therefore to a much lesser extent relying on manufacturing employment as the engine of overall economic development. You can see the dramatic losses in employment for our state economy over the course of the Great Recession. In fact, employment slowing in 2006, remaining in the black, but slowing, and then moving into the red for a prolonged period of time. We now have job growth that has resumed, and as you can see there, the outlook for the state and for the nation. My forecast, this actually is a forecast that goes back to February. I'm revising the forecast right now, probably released in about 2 weeks. The outlook is going to be roughly the same as that is contained in the economic report to the governor, which is our most comprehensive forecast for the state economy. Decent economic growth. As I'm working through the numbers right now, I'm not quite signed off on the employment numbers, but around 1.6% growth for this year, and about 1.8% growth in employment next year. Fairly strong rates of growth. And as you can see, just looking at those lines, you've got to go back to 2005, 2006 to see levels of rates of employment growth that would match what we expect to see over the course of the next couple of years. Here's the outlook by sector. Professional and business services have been doing very, very well, a very important and growing component of our state and our regional economy. Education and health services never even really hurt by the Great Recession. Those were the two sectors of our economy that through 2008, through 2009, and 2010 continued to grow while virtually every other sector of our economy has contracted. There again is that growth in manufacturing, that manufacturing renaissance, some of which is a return of the jobs lost during the Great Recession. Some of it is new employment, some of it is that advanced manufacturing that we're hearing more and more about. Advanced manufacturing is a rather ill-defined notion. People tend to think of advanced manufacturing in terms of a final product like a smartphone. That's a piece of advanced manufacturing, but advanced manufacturing is also all about production processes. So you could be manufacturing the dumbest product in the world and still use very advanced technologies, equipment, worker skills to produce that particular product. I'm working on a report with a colleague in MAPI, the Manufacturing Alliance for Productivity Innovation, for the Southern Governors Association, and that report is looking at advanced manufacturing in the SGA states. And advanced manufacturing has caught the eye of policymakers around the country, those in the industrial recruitment industry. And as we were first starting that, I was lobbying to make the report a broad report about manufacturing, where advanced manufacturing can apply to every sector and every production process. That is not the approach we ended up taking. We ended up focusing more on these niche type technologies like 3D printing and so on, which have caught the eye of the public. But think of advanced manufacturing as something that can affect every manufacturing firm, every manufacturing job, every manufacturing production process. And it's all about ensuring that these companies can produce and compete in a highly competitive global environment. So that's my take on advanced manufacturing. Yeah, there's some sexy products and processes out there, but in principle, we should be able to take advanced manufacturing practice and apply it to everything we do within the manufacturing sector. Unemployment rates drifting down, not moving down. You can see the sharp rise in unemployment rates, and because we had subpar job growth in 2009 and 2010, we were not able to absorb workers into the labor market in 2007, 8, 9, or 10. We have this huge backlog of workers looking for employment, and we have not been able to significantly bring down the ranks of the unemployed. The unemployment rate will come out very soon for the month of April, and that rate's going to be coming in at 8%. So it's gone up a little bit. My forecast for the first quarter of the year actually had the unemployment rate moving up from the fourth quarter of last year. Not a very popular thing to do in a forecast, to go out on a limb and suggest things are going to get worse. But the labor market conditions were such that I really believe we would see unemployment rate rise. And in fact, it did for the first quarter of the year. Two pieces of really good news for the economy. A third, that manufacturing renaissance, I think is important. But building permits, we're seeing a significant turnaround now in residential construction activity across the state and across the country. Very important to help prop up property values, to help prop up our local property tax base, but also to put construction workers back on the job and create that effect on our state and local sales tax base through the purchase of all of the building materials and all of the furniture and fixtures that go into those new homes. Light vehicle sales are the other big story here. You can see light vehicle sales returning, getting closer and closer to where they were before the Great Recession started. We're not there yet. This is, again, one of those measures of economic activity that has not fully been restored. Very, very important to Volkswagen, to the entire array of auto suppliers and assemblers across the state and across the region. We are a very, very important state in terms of light vehicle production. But don't just think automobiles. This is transportation equipment across the board. It's boats, it's aircraft, it's everything that goes into the transportation equipment sector of our economy. Very, very important piece of our state economy. And comparing it to the early 1980s, when we were not even on the map in terms of light vehicle employment, employment-related production, or production of vehicles themselves. Per capita income in Tennessee, we have been stuck at around 90%. If you can look below the 100 line, what you're looking at Tennessee's per capita income relative to per capita income for the nation as a whole, and it comes in at about 90%. Over the course of the 1970s and 80s, we moved from 80% of the national average up to 90% of the national average, and that is where we're stuck. Now, part of that reflects the historical mix of jobs that we've had within our state economy. A big part of it reflects the educational attainment of our workforce and our adult population. A particular bright spot is that proprietor's income. Proprietor's income, which is coming in at around 125, 130% of proprietor's income per capita for the nation as a whole. A very good indication that we have a very entrepreneurial climate in Tennessee compared to the nation as a whole. Put things in perspective across the southeastern states, Tennessee coming in using a little bit different data. We're actually under 90% right here. Only one state within the southeast region, Virginia, being above the national average in per capita income. And there you can find where you live and find per capita income. You can do a little comparison of educational attainment. And where educational attainment is high, what you will find is per capita income is high. I can go back and forth, and you can find places where educational attainment is low and per capita income is low. So investments in education, very, very important. And I understand not a happy talk this morning at the breakfast table about the funding woes confronting your school system here. Those funding problems are pretty pervasive across the country, across Tennessee, as local communities are struggling with their own budget difficulties and then paying the price of budget difficulties at the state level as well, which have in many instances hampered the ability of local governments to fund education. So let me wind down here some key points. Growth prospects for 2013 dampened by a global slowdown, the Chinese economy slowing down, the European Union in recession, at least a dozen countries within the European Union in contraction, not a collapse of the European Union economy, but enough of a contraction to take a lot of economic activity out of the international arena. We continue to be challenged by these one-time shocks. Now, if it was just the one-time shock that went away, but we tend to see this ongoing string of one-time shocks that have been adversely affecting the economy. The good news here is that I think the economy is on a firm enough foundation today to weather the storm of any of the shocks that we might create today in our mind, our imagination, in terms of what might happen in the next year or two. A large shock, a large collapse in economic activity, a major terrorist attack, a total disruption of oil production in the Middle East, yes, that might throw the U.S. economy in recession. Those are all very, very low probability events. So expect GDP for the nation to be around 2 and 2.5% this year, growing to over 3% next year. We will see economic growth accelerate in 2014, maybe a little bit stronger growth in 2015. They will be the strongest years of growth, and it's going back to the early 2000s. Don't lose sight of the long-term things that make Tennessee a good place to live and a good place to do business. It's easy in difficult times to make cuts, to cut our household budget, to cut our government budget, to do things in our business world that we may not do when conditions were a bit stronger. Keep your eyes on the fundamentals that make our economy strong, your business strong, and use those things to look to the future and make good decisions.